Good evening and welcome to The Right Side, the show where we talk about today's news, views, trends, and opinions from an admittedly conservative perspective. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and this evening we're joined by Ken Smith. He's an activist that's extremely active with the Fair Tax, and Ken, we're glad to have you on the show.
Thank you, Chris. Pleasure being here.
So, taxation is not something that people get normally excited about, except for around this time of year.
So true.
But what would get someone to go beyond just being tweaked about taxes or just moderately disgusted with taxes to actually dedicating a big chunk of their free time in life to fighting for something like the fair tax? It intrigues me. How did you get involved in this whole deal?
Boy, when you ask the question that way, it goes to my gut. Because I'll just say right away, a few years ago, when I was having my own personal issues with taxation, my own personal hassles with it and so forth, I contemplated suicide. But what really got me to get involved more actively, more recently, is a few years ago when I got a call from my estranged wife back east. My daughter was threatening suicide, and then I made a cross-country trip to, got suicide prevention folks involved. I made a cross-country trip across the country, and all I could think about was she was actually going through with the process. I had to silence my phone on the trip across the country, a red-eye flight, and I was really contemplating finding when I arrived that she had actually committed the act. And that gut feeling, I cannot tell you how intense that was. And so out of that came a lot of my activism that I'm involved with now. I got first introduced to the fair tax back when I was having my own personal issues back in the year 2000 down there. And that's when the fair tax was first introduced in the Congress in the year 2000. And I heard it at a tax summit that was held by the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. So when I heard that, I said, boy, this needs to happen. Okay. Because at that time I was literally feeling the direct effects of my own personal issues that I was going through with taxation.
So what drives someone to, I mean, we all get frustrated at tax time, but what drives someone to that level of pain that they would contemplate suicide over their tax situation?
Well, you know, it's interesting you say that, Chris, and I was a delegate to the Medical Society in Massachusetts in the 90s. And on April 14, I don't remember which year it was, it may have been 1998, 1999, a man came from Boston to his summer home on Cape Cod on the evening of April 14. They found him the next morning. He had put a gun to his mouth. And I was so motivated by that I actually created a resolution for the Medical Society. And when you create a resolution, you have whereas blah, 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 and whereas blah, 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 and then therefore, yeah. They introduced this resolution. And it was not passed by the delegates of the Medical Society, but it was brought forward. But one of the attorneys on the staff at the Medical Society said, you can't suggest that a governmental agency can be responsible for somebody committing suicide. I said, well, I'm saying that the system is so painful potentially for an individual that they see that their only fresh outlook is to end their life.
And so was that taxation related too for that doctor?
Yeah, that person was taxation related, exactly. Yeah. Okay. And I don't know the details. I just remember I remember how that affected me. This was years before my own experience, where I actually had that feeling of, the only way I got this cloud over my head. The only way I can really make amends with the government, I have a fairly healthy life insurance policy, will make it look like an accident. I'll end up drowning in the pool, and the doctor drowns in the pool. It's, that's just an unfortunate situation, right? And my wife and family would have the money to pay the taxes and then have a little money left over. But that's how intense it was for me personally. Yeah.
Wow. And so it wasn't that you were some successful evil person just trying to get out of paying your taxes. You actually had a little bit of a run-up, and just order of events.
Well, we had, as I said to you a little while ago, we had a problem with a home that got underwater with a mortgage. You know, the real estate market had collapsed in the 90s. And so we ended up having to declare personal bankruptcy, and we had the tax indebtedness that didn't disappear, and that carried over, and I kept trying to pay it down and so forth, but I still had it. And of course, with interest and penalties, that bite just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Right.
And I literally felt like I had a cloud that took my life, you know.
Right.
I mean, I have 5 children, and they all got well educated in college and so forth, and they're all young adults. They're doing very well. I'm very proud of that. Mm-hmm. But my focus was on my family, and my focus was on my practice. I admit now, and I will always admit, I'm not a good businessman, as are most doctors not good businessmen.
They didn't go into business. They didn't go into the practice to be businessmen. They went in to serve their community, to heal or improve people's life.
And some who are more aware that they need to become businessmen. Many doctors now have MBAs, you know.
Right.
Because they got to get that special expertise.
Right.
But it's pitiful, you know, and it's not right.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you get a little bit sideways on your taxes, it can affect things like getting licensed or being able to stay in practice.
Well, that's what happened to me, Chris. After I went through the bankruptcy, and the bank had actually assigned a new accountant for me, I got misled by the previous accountant I had. And in fact, ironically, that accountant was stealing money from folks and ended up being imprisoned himself. But that particular situation, so the accountant that I was assigned to me by the bank, I went to file my taxes this particular year, and he gave me the returns. I signed it, and then I said, look, I got to show you this other piece of paper I have, and I have to get your advice. I said, I'm renewing my license. At the bottom of the license it says, under penalty of perjury, I proclaim that my state and federal taxes are up to date. I said to him, what do I do? He said, well, I'll just sign it. Well, I signed it, but my conscience didn't buy that too well. And therefore, after that, I just said, look, I can't live with, so I stupidly, and I would never advise anybody that's watching this to do this, I took on my own volition, nobody suggested it to me, I chose to stop filing income taxes, you know, and therefore my tax liability only increased, and I continued to get the letters and so forth and so on, and it escalated thereafter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when that occurs, and if your license is at risk, you can't even generate the income you would need to pay the taxes back anyway. So it's just a vicious cycle.
Well, that's what ultimately happened, and again, I've sort of had some. I am, as I shared with you a while ago, I actively speak at the Suicide Prevention Speakers Bureau in our county, and I do tell my story about my personal disaster leading to a threat of suicide, and that was over the fact that I got in such trouble with the IRS and with a district court in Massachusetts, and I was sentenced, and I couldn't believe when I was sentenced. I mean, my wife, I'll never forget how she gushed in tears and broke down in the courtroom, and I spent, you know, a year of my life, but because of that, I lost the ability to renew my license after that.
Right. So you're saying sentenced for a year of your life.
Exactly. I spent a year in a federal prison camp.
A year in a federal prison camp?
Yeah.
Over not paying your taxes?
The misdemeanor charge of failure to file income taxes.
So you're saying it's not even a felony, and you end up in federal prison for a tax violation?
That's correct. I did. Nobody in the prison system could understand that. Well, I don't know about nobody, but the case manager, the guards I spoke to, nobody said, what are you doing here? They kept asking me. I said, well.
And now we're arming the IRS because they've got to enforce health care.
Oh, yes.
And so we're arming them with semi-automatic, automatic weapons to come in and collect from people. Jail isn't bad enough. Now we're arming them.
That's true. as I told you a while ago, I empathize with an individual like Donald Trump, who's saying, why am I being singled out as a very wealthy man? I admit to be a very wealthy person. Why am I being audited, though, when so-and-so over here who's equally as wealthy or maybe even more wealthy, he's not being singled out to be audited every year.
Right.
So I do feel like, and again, whether there's any basis for it or not, I don't know, but I do feel that I was singled out as I was at that time somewhat, quote, politically active. I had a community TV show about managed health care, and I received phone calls from people. You know, we had a very active, I mean, in fact, the community TV folks said our show was the most popular. We had so many calls coming in, you know, and so that went on for a couple of years. I did that. So was I a political prisoner? I don't know.
It almost sounds like you were a political prisoner, or at least an example of this is how you don't behave, and we're going to make sure that everybody knows it.
Yeah.
Scary third world country kind of treatment you received there.
Well, the other thing I have to share is, as I shared with you a while ago, I'm very heavy into this suicide prevention program, and in our community we've had young people who've committed suicide. It's so horrendous. Right. And Vic Ojakian, who's a former mayor of Palo Alto, who's also very active in this movement, his son. He and his wife lost their son when he was in college from suicide. Mm-hmm. But what really strikes me is when I hear these stories about veterans, my heart bleeds for them, because I didn't fight a war in Afghanistan or Iraq. Right. I simply went to federal prison for a year. But I came out of that.
Simply went to federal prison for a year.
Right. That's all I did.
There's no such thing as simply went to federal prison for a year.
I didn't get beat up. I didn't get beat up. I didn't get, slapped around. Actually, I did have an event where I'm in the lunch line one day, and the guard was standing there to guard the forks, knives, and spoons, which were incidentally all plastic. But there were no forks. So I stopped with my tray. I said, "Sir, there aren't any forks." So he yells back to another prisoner who's doing the dishwashing, right? "We need forks." And so he said, "Just wait." So I stood there and waited. Another prisoner who was in a long white apron comes around. He managed cleaning up the salad bar and stuff. He comes around to me. The guy from the dishwasher says, "Tell him to eat his lunch with a spoon. He doesn't need a fork." So I said to the guard, I said, "Well, should I go eat my dinner?" "No, just hold off." So I'm standing there waiting. This guy comes over and he slams me against the bar, and he said, "Didn't you hear him say that?" And this is right in front of a guard,
Yeah.
Well, I didn't mean to get into this story, but it's a lie. It's a true story. Right. What happened to me then was I go with my heart beating 1,000 miles an hour, finally to join my fellows to eat my dinner. It was actually dinner, not lunch. And I'm asking them, what should I do? And they said, well, we think maybe you ought to go ask the guard. So I go ask a guard, and stupidly, I ended up in the captain's office, and then I ended up being in what they call the hole for a week. So I was in 24-hour hold down for a week because somebody accosted me in the line. Now, was I singled out? I don't know.
Yeah, what a mess.
It was a mess.
So how is your involvement in the fair tax going to change that, relieve some of that pressure for people?
Well, I just don't want to see other families go through it. Now, I do think that there are many, many, many more people out there being affected adversely by our current system. I mean, I just printed out an article that came out of USA Today about 700,000 people's identity has been stolen through the IRS.
Right.
So people's identity has been stolen, and many of them, including one of my sons, incidentally, he goes to file his taxes with TurboTax a couple years ago, and they say, you've already filed.
And your refund's already been sent.
And your refund's already been sent. You don't have it. Yeah. Right. So that experience, so I'm saying that those people are being affected by a very stupidly complex system.
Right.
And a system that I'm sure if you took a toll of the people who actually work for that entity. They're not bad people. They're good people. But they just follow their orders. They just do what they're supposed to do. You know, just as the people in the prison system did to me. They followed orders to do what they did, you know.
Except for to provide forks to the forkless.
Exactly.
But for people who don't understand what the fair tax is, give us a high-level summary. Okay,
well, the fair tax in a simple terms is, first of all, it's a citizen-created bill. And 2 bills that are in Congress, they've been in Congress since the year 2000. Mm-hmm. They come up every couple years in each session of Congress. They've been in the House Ways and Means Committee, kind of shelved. Mm-hmm. That at one point, well, I'm getting distracted. You asked me what the fair tax is.
Yes.
So the fair tax basically is getting rid of anything you can think of that says federal and tax. So no more personal income tax, 0 corporate tax, no capital gains tax, no estate taxes, no gift taxes. And all of that is, and no more filing tax returns, and therefore no more need for the IRS in the current capacity that they have. So it's disappearing income tax.
Right.
We're going to stop penalizing hard work, savings, investments, and entrepreneurship. Okay. We're going to reward that by having, so everybody will have control of their taxation by how much they spend. So it'll only be taxation on new goods and services. So when you go buy something, you would pay the tax at the time you buy it. Mm-hmm. If it's a new item. If you buy a used car, you wouldn't be taxed because that car had already been taxed once. So we're not going to have double taxation or triple taxation and all the other stuff.
Sounds like you're trying to starve the government to death.
Oh, no. This is a revenue-neutral bill. It was studied by the folks who created this or started this whole activity. 3 successful businessmen in Houston in the mid-'90s got together and they said, I don't know their personal experiences with taxation. I don't know whether they were being audited or multiple times or whatever, but the 3 of them got together and said, there's got to be a better way. So they invested $4 million of their own dollars to hire these very well-known economists from around the country.
Assuming it's post-tax dollars.
Oh, yes, certainly, definitely. So the economists who studied it, and they didn't know what kind of plans. So they said, we just need to come up with your proposal. They expected them to come back and say a flat income tax. Right. When they came back and said, we suggest a consumption tax, this is our program, to be revenue neutral, bringing in the same amount of money that's currently being brought in by the income tax system, blah, blah, blah. So that's how it evolved. And then they spent more money in further research over time. Right. But this was a citizen-created. This wasn't a politician and his staff getting together on the back of an envelope and saying, hey, we need to reform the tax code.
Well, that's the problem. Politicians don't get together with their staff. What happens is the cronies get together, and then they get together with the politician and present them their proposal and say, you get it through and we'll fund your campaign.
Exactly.
And so what you're saying is cut out the cronies, cut out the politicians.
Exactly.
And go ahead and generate the revenue in a different way.
That's exactly what we want to do.
And so you're also saying that by spending it on consumption, that people are just paying for and contributing to the tax system on the goods that they buy.
Exactly. So you're going to be taxing also that very heavy underground economy that's probably to the tune of around $1 trillion a year.
Yeah.
Who don't pay taxes, but they can certainly brag, which I had some of those folks I met in prison showing me the picture of their beautiful $1 million plus homes in Florida.
Yes.
With their wives standing in the front door, drug dealers, right?
Yeah.
And those guys didn't pay taxes. And then we have the prostitutes who aren't, there's all that underground economy that we would get. We also have 50 million visitors.
Well, if you start taxing people's prostitutes, I'm sure that somebody is going to object.
I'm sure they will. So, but you're going to be, that's what makes it fair. Everybody will have skin in the game.
No reference to the prostitutes a moment ago. Yeah, okay, got it.
But nobody, yeah, that's right. I didn't mean to.
So, but what you're saying though is, for example, for people who are concerned about the rich aren't paying their fair share of taxes, if the rich buy lots of expensive stuff, they're going to pay lots of taxes.
Exactly.
If poor people only buy little bits of stuff, they're only going to pay little bits of taxes.
Exactly.
you're talking crazy. You're not punishing people fairly.
Well, that's what the argument is on but what is included in these two bills? The House bill is H.R. 25, the Senate bill is Senate Bill 155. In both of those bills is incorporated what's called a prebate. So for everybody up to the poverty level, everybody would receive from the federal government at the beginning of the month enough money to pay for their essential goods and services. Right. So even if at the low end of the income scale, you would pay for just like everybody else. So you would be only because of having a Social Security number, that's all you need, and your family members to have Social Security numbers. So it'd be based on family size, not based on income or anything else. But my point is that those at the lower end, they go buy a loaf of bread at the grocery store, they're going to pay the same tax as the guy who buys a loaf of bread who's multimillionaire, right? Okay. Just as he does today in our current economy. If I go to the gas station and fill up my tank, and the guy next door to me is in a rundown Chevrolet that's just barely running.
Oh, you've been at the gas station next to me.
Exactly. But he pays the same price for his gas.
Yes.
Now, those opponents of ours say, well, it's not fair that the guy who's a multimillionaire, he's going to have an ability to buy all this stuff, and it's not fair. He's going to be paying, well, he's going to be paying millions of dollars in taxes. Maybe the other guy's going to be maybe paying a few hundred or whatever.
But here's the other thing. If we're looking at your personal life story or the doctor that's there, instead of waiting until the end of the year or even to the end of the quarter and having to pay and be at risk of getting behind on your taxes and all of the guilt and associated baggage that comes with that, you're actually paying your taxes as you go because it's based on each purchase.
Absolutely.
So you don't get behind. There's not the guilt at the end of the year.
Exactly.
There's not the panic at the end of the year.
Also, I got to share with you, my wife used to say, can't we have one Christmas without a lot of stress financially? Because we had it not planned, but quarterly professional liability premiums were due on a quarterly basis. Sure. Simultaneously, the quarterly tax payments. Now, as I said to you earlier, I wasn't an outstanding businessman. Right. Maybe if I had had better advice, etc., maybe I'd had a different experience. But we would find ourselves behind the eight ball. Sometimes at the end of a payroll period, sometimes we'd find ourselves behind the eight ball. Where we might have a weekend where, well, guys, we're going to eat ramen noodles this weekend. Our staff got paid. Privileges
of business ownership.
Absolutely. Right? But why should it be penalized? Why should it be made wrong or,
So, I think that there's a lot of information people are going to need about the fair tax. We're about out of time for now, but where can people find out more about the fair tax and how it can be beneficial to them?
Well, we have a couple of websites, www.fairtax.org.
Magic.
Yeah, and another one, www.fairtaxnation.org or .com.
Okay.
And we also have a California website. I'm the California Director of the Fair Tax, and we have a website called www.ca, for California, CA, the number 4, fairtax.org.
Okay, great. Yeah. Well, hopefully people will look those up. Ken, thank you for being on the show. If you hold on for just a moment, we'll be back after a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum.
Thank you.
Some people think that a meeting of conservatives in Silicon Valley could fit in a small room. In fact, when the Conservative Forum was founded in 2003, we did meet in a small room, a coffee shop in San Jose. It doesn't get more grassroots than this. It may surprise you that there are thousands of people right here in Silicon Valley who share your principles of liberty, free markets, and limited government. Since our humble beginnings in that coffee shop, we've outgrown 3 meeting halls. From San Jose to Gilroy to Mill Valley, we bring hundreds of people together each month from all over the Bay Area to promote the principles of American liberty. How do we do it? It starts with a stellar lineup of speakers. Speakers like Steve Forbes, Senator Jim DeMint, Dr. Victor Davis Hanson, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, Andrew Breitbart, Pamela Geller, and many others. These speakers passionately articulate our shared principles and remind us why conservatism isn't just the smart choice, it's also the moral choice. Our monthly meetings are only one dimension of the forum. We underwrite The Right Side, a monthly television show on cable access channel KMVT. We also host a monthly Constitution discussion group and provide tables at our meetings for more than a dozen local groups who share our love of liberty to promote their specific cause. The Conservative Forum is the premier place in Silicon Valley for conservatives to gather, become invigorated, motivated, and empowered. We welcome guests to our monthly meetings and offer special discounted pricing to first-time visitors. Take a look at our speaker lineup in the coming months and join us to learn why we say liberty is made in America.
And welcome back to The Right Side. That was a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum. We appreciate them tremendously. They're underwriting us for now our 5th season on the air. But what they're best known for is their speaker series, which happens the second Tuesday of each month at 432 Stearland Road at the IFES Portuguese Hall, about 3 minutes from the studio here. And those speakers are many times internationally known, at a minimum nationally known. We do have some local celebrities as well that plug in. But for example, in April, on the 12th, Pete Hegseth, he's a decorated soldier, a Fox News Channel contributor, and he'll be representing the generation of American leaders. He'll be speaking. In May, on the 10th, John Eastman, faculty member of the Chapman Law University School since 1999, and is also the chairman of the board of the National Organization for Marriage, will be speaking. If you'd like more information on the program at the forum, you can find that at theconservativeforum.com. In closing this evening, I'd like to just reinforce that it's time to do some research on some of the things that Ken was talking about in the fair tax, and really cutting out the cronies, cutting out the politicians, and moving right toward generating tax the old-fashioned way on the movement of goods and services, making it simpler, making it faster, and taking the pressure off of so many that are negatively impacted and, in fact, jailed in some cases or threatened with jail for having a complex tax system. You can learn more at any of the websites that Ken mentioned, but also you can look at fairtax.org for more information. I'd like to thank you for joining us this evening on The Right Side. I've been your host, Chris Pareja, and I'll look forward to seeing you again in person or on the show sometime soon. But if you just can't wait, reach out to us at therightside@gmail.com, and we'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks again, and have a great evening.